"Please don't touch me," she begged the Lakota warrior. But he had to save her life. The wind moved across the open land like a quiet warning, carrying snowflakes that spun slowly under the dark sky. Evening had come early that day, and the cold felt heavier than usual, pressing against everything it touched. The road that crossed the hills was nearly empty, covered by thin ice that made every turn dangerous. Most people avoided driving in such weather, but sometimes life placed people exactly where they were not expecting to be. Not far from a line of bare trees, a pickup truck moved slowly along the road. Inside sat a Lakota warrior, known among his people for his steady nature and calm presence. He was not a warrior in the way movies showed, but in the deeper sense taught by his elders, someone who protected, listened, and stood firm when others could not. He had spent years helping his community, working quietly without seeking attention or praise. That evening he was returning home after checking on an elderly neighbor when his radio crackled with urgent news. A vehicle had gone off the road near the sacred hills. Someone might be trapped. He did not hesitate. Turning his truck carefully, he followed the direction given, his eyes focused on the icy path ahead. Snow began falling harder, blurring the horizon and making the world feel smaller. The land around him was familiar. Yet the storm changed everything, hiding shapes and sounds beneath a white silence. When he reached the area, he slowed down, scanning the roadside. At first he saw nothing but snow-covered ground. Then, a faint reflection caught his attention. Metal partly hidden beneath drifting snow. He parked safely and stepped outside, the cold air hitting his face like sharp needles. Pulling his coat tighter, he walked toward the damaged vehicle. The car had slid down a shallow slope and stopped against a cluster of rocks. One headlight flickered weakly, casting an uneven glow across the snow. He approached slowly, making sure his footsteps were visible and his movements clear. Years of helping people had taught him that sudden actions could cause fear, especially when someone was already in distress. Inside the car, he saw a woman sitting stiffly in the driver's seat. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, even though the engine was off. Her breathing was fast and her eyes moved quickly toward him when she noticed his shadow outside. He stopped a few steps away from the door, raising one hand slightly so she could see he meant no harm. His voice was calm and low when he spoke through the cracked window.
"It's okay," he said gently. "I'm here to help."
"You're not alone." The moment the words reached her, her expression changed. Fear sharpened her face, and she shook her head quickly. "Please don't touch me," she said, her voice trembling. "Just don't come close." He paused immediately, respecting her request. He stepped back slightly to give her space, keeping his posture relaxed so she would not feel threatened. The storm moved around them, wind brushing snow against his coat while silence filled the space between them.
"I won't do anything you don't want," he replied calmly.
"But it's very cold, and we need to make sure you're safe." She looked away from him, her shoulders tense. He noticed small details. The way she held her arm close to her body, the pale color of her face, the way she winced slightly when she moved. Something was wrong beyond simple fear. He crouched down slowly, lowering himself so his presence felt less overwhelming. "Can you tell me if you're hurt?" he asked gently. She hesitated. For a long moment the only sound was the wind pushing against the car. Finally she nodded slightly but did not speak. The Lakota warrior understood that trust would not come quickly. He remembered teachings from his grandfather, that patience was stronger than force, and listening was more powerful than speaking. So he waited, allowing silence to exist without pressure. "I'm going to stay right here," he said after a moment. "You can decide what happens next." The words seemed to ease something inside her. Her breathing slowed slightly, though fear still lingered in her eyes. She watched him carefully, as if measuring every movement. He noticed that the temperature was dropping fast. Snow gathered along the edges of the vehicle and the light from the headlamp grew dimmer. If they stayed too long without action, the cold alone could become dangerous. Without approaching her, he began working nearby, clearing snow away from the side of the car to prevent it from becoming buried. Each movement was slow and visible, showing her that he respected her space. Minutes passed. The storm deepened. Darkness wrapped around them, turning the world into shadows and soft white shapes. Eventually, she spoke again, her voice quieter this time. "Why are you helping me?" He thought for a moment before answering. "Because someone needs help," he said simply. "That is enough." She stared at him as if she did not fully believe the answer. Perhaps she had lived in a world where help always came with conditions, but he did not ask questions she was not ready to answer. Instead, he focused on practical things, checking the surroundings, making sure the vehicle was stable, and planning how to keep them safe until rescue could arrive. He used his phone to call for assistance, giving clear details about their location, though he knew weather might delay responders. When he finished, he returned to his previous position, staying close enough to watch her condition, but far enough to respect her boundaries. The cold crept slowly into the car. He could see her shivering now, despite her effort to remain still. After thinking carefully, he spoke again. "I have blankets in my truck," he said. "I can leave one by the door if you want. You can take it yourself." She hesitated, then gave a small nod. He walked back to his truck, retrieved a thick blanket, and placed it gently near the open space beside her car door before stepping away again. She watched him carefully before slowly reaching out and pulling the blanket inside. The small action felt like a fragile step toward trust. As the night deepened, their quiet connection began forming through small exchanges. Short questions, simple answers, moments of silence that felt less heavy with each passing minute. The storm surrounded them, but inside that small circle of light and patience, something steady began to grow. He knew that saving her life might require more than physical strength. It would require understanding, respect, and time, things that could not be rushed. The storm did not slow down. Snow fell thicker, covering the ground like a heavy blanket that erased every clear path. The wind moved across the hills with a low, steady sound that felt endless. Inside the damaged car, the woman wrapped the blanket closer around her shoulders, her eyes watching the Lakota warrior through the dim light. He stayed where he had promised, never moving closer without warning. Every action he took was slow and visible, showing respect for her space. He knew that trust could not be forced. It had to be given freely. Minutes passed in silence before he spoke again. "My name is Daniel," he said quietly, his voice calm but strong enough to be heard over the wind. "You don't have to tell me yours if you don't want to." She hesitated, her fingers tightening around the blanket. For a moment he thought she would remain silent. Then she whispered, almost as if testing the sound of her own voice, "Emily." He nodded gently. "It's good to meet you, Emily." The simple exchange changed something between them. Names made people real. They created a connection that felt less like strangers and more like two human beings sharing a difficult moment. He continued clearing snow around the car, careful not to shake the vehicle too much. Every few minutes he checked on her from a distance, asking simple questions that required only small answers.
"Are you warm enough?" She nodded.
"Are you feeling dizzy?" A pause, then a small nod again. He noticed how she avoided sudden movements, as if even shifting her body caused pain. Her left arm remained pressed against her side, and when she adjusted the blanket, he saw her face tighten slightly. "You might be injured," he said gently. "I won't come closer unless you ask, but can you tell me where it hurts?" She looked down, breathing slowly, as if deciding whether to trust him with the answer. "My side," she said finally, "and my shoulder." He listened carefully. "Thank you for telling me. Try to stay still as much as you can. Help is coming, but the weather may slow them down." Her eyes flickered with worry at the word slow.
"How long?"
she asked.
"I don't know,"
he answered honestly. "But we will manage until they arrive." He did not say it lightly. He meant it. The temperature continued to drop. Frost began forming on the inside edges of the car windows. He realized they needed more protection from the cold. After thinking for a moment, he spoke again. "I'm going to build a small barrier against the wind using snow," he said. "It will make the car warmer. I will stay where you can see me." She watched him closely but did not object. He worked steadily, using his hands and a small shovel from his truck to pack snow around the side facing the wind. The movement kept his body warm, and the effort showed her that he was committed to keeping her safe without crossing her boundaries. Inside the car, Emily watched him through half-closed eyes. Something about his quiet focus felt different from what she expected. He never rushed, never tried to control the situation through force. Even when urgency surrounded them, he moved with patience. After finishing, he returned to his earlier position and sat on a rock a few feet away. The storm surrounded them, but the space between them felt calmer than before. "Why were you driving out here?" he asked gently after a long silence. "You don't have to answer if you don't want." She stared at the dark windshield, her reflection faint against the glass. "I was leaving," she said finally. "Leaving what?" She hesitated again, then shook her head slightly. "Just leaving." He accepted the answer without pushing further. That alone seemed to ease her tension. She was used to people asking too many questions too quickly. His restraint showed respect. Time passed slowly. The cold pressed against both of them, but their quiet conversation became a small source of warmth. At one point, Emily shifted in her seat and gasped softly. Her breathing became uneven. "Are you okay?" he asked immediately, staying where he was. "It hurts," she said through clenched teeth. He thought carefully. "Would you like me to guide you through a way to support your side with a blanket?" "You can do it yourself." She nodded weakly. Using calm, clear instructions, he helped her adjust the blanket to reduce pressure on her injury. He avoided any physical contact, allowing her to remain in control. Slowly, her breathing steadied again. "You're doing well," he said quietly. She glanced at him with surprise. Perhaps she was not used to encouragement that felt genuine. "Why are you so patient?" she asked after a while. He thought about the question before answering. "My elders taught me that every person carries their own story," he said. "We cannot see all of it, so we must move with care." She looked away quickly, as if the words touched something deep inside her. Darkness wrapped around the hills, turning the world into a narrow circle of light from the damaged car. To keep her awake and aware, he began telling simple stories. Not dramatic ones, but small memories of his community, lessons learned from older generations, moments of humor that felt real and grounded. His voice remained steady, never loud, never demanding attention. Emily listened quietly. At first she responded with only short answers, but gradually she began asking small questions. Each exchange felt like another fragile thread connecting them. Hours passed. The cold deepened, and exhaustion began pulling at both of them. He fought against it, knowing he needed to stay alert. At one point, her eyes closed longer than before. "Emily," he said gently, careful not to startle her. "Stay with me. Can you tell me something about yourself? Anything you want?" She opened her eyes slowly. "I like painting," she whispered. "Landscapes." He smiled slightly. "These hills would make a strong painting." She looked out at the darkness and snow. "Maybe," she said softly. The conversation kept her awake. It also gave her something else, a reminder that she was more than the fear she carried. Eventually she spoke words that felt heavier than anything before. "I don't trust people easily," she said quietly. "That's okay," he replied without hesitation. She looked at him carefully, waiting for judgment that never came. "I'm trying," she added after a moment. "I know," he said gently. That simple response seemed to lift some invisible weight from her shoulders. The storm still surrounded them, and danger remained real, but the distance between them had changed. She no longer watched him with constant fear. Instead, there was cautious acceptance, a slow opening that neither of them rushed. The night felt endless. Snow continued falling, covering old tracks and creating a quiet world that seemed cut off from everything else. The wind moved more slowly now, but the cold remained sharp, reaching into every space it could find. The small circle of light around the damaged car felt like the only place that existed. Daniel stayed alert, even as fatigue pressed against him. He had learned long ago that staying calm during difficult moments helped others feel safe. He watched Emily carefully, noticing small changes in her breathing and posture. She looked more tired than before, and her movements had become slower. Inside the car, Emily shifted slightly, then stopped as a wave of pain passed through her. She closed her eyes tightly and waited for it to fade. "I'm here," Daniel said softly, keeping his voice steady. "You're not alone." She opened her eyes and nodded faintly. The fear that had filled her earlier was still present, but it no longer controlled every reaction. Something had changed during the long hours of quiet conversation and patience. For a while, neither of them spoke. The silence between them felt different now, less heavy, more comfortable. Daniel stood slowly and walked to his truck, keeping himself within her view as promised. He brought back a small thermos and placed it carefully near the car door before stepping back again. "It's warm tea," he said. "You can take it if you want." Emily hesitated, watching him closely. After a moment she reached out slowly, her hand shaking slightly as she picked up the thermos. The warmth spread through her fingers, and she held it there for a few seconds before opening it. The steam rising from the tea felt like a small gift in the freezing air. She took a careful sip, closing her eyes briefly as the warmth moved through her body. "Thank you," she whispered.
"You're welcome,"
he replied simply. The quiet exchange felt meaningful. Earlier, even accepting a blanket had been difficult for her. Now she was allowing more help, even if slowly. Time passed. The sky above remained dark, though the storm began losing some of its strength. Snow fell more gently now, drifting instead of striking the ground. Emily's thoughts wandered as she sat there. She watched Daniel moving calmly, always aware of her space, always asking before doing anything that might affect her. She had met many people in her life who ignored boundaries, who pushed past hesitation without caring. His behavior felt different, steady and respectful.
"Can I ask you something?" she said suddenly.
"Of course," he answered. "Why didn't you just help me anyway? When I said not to touch me, you could have ignored that." He thought carefully before answering. "Because trust matters," he said quietly. "If I take that away, even for a good reason, then I'm not truly helping." She looked down at the blanket in her hands, thinking about his words. They felt simple, but they carried weight. Another wave of pain passed through her side, stronger this time. She let out a soft sound before she could stop herself. Daniel immediately noticed. "Is it worse?" he asked gently. She nodded, her breathing uneven. "It's
sharper." He understood that injuries could change over time, especially in cold conditions.
He needed to help her remain stable without breaking the boundaries she had set. "You're doing very well," he said calmly. "Can you try to breathe slowly with me? In and out." He demonstrated the rhythm, his voice steady and reassuring. She followed his pace, her breathing slowly returning to normal. The moment created a quiet connection between them. Even without touching, he supported her through presence and guidance. As the hours passed, Emily felt something inside her shifting. The fear that had made her pull away from him earlier felt less intense. She began noticing small details, the way he never raised his voice, the way he waited for her responses without impatience, the way he respected silence. Finally, she spoke again, her voice softer than before. "I wasn't always like this," she said. He listened without interrupting. "I used to trust people easily," she continued. "But things changed." She stopped there as if unsure how much to share. "That's okay," he said gently. "You don't have to explain anything you're not ready to." She nodded slowly, grateful for the lack of pressure. Minutes later, another strong wave of dizziness hit her. The world around her seemed to tilt slightly, and she grabbed the edge of the seat to steady herself. Daniel noticed immediately. "Emily," he said softly, "stay with me." "Look at me." She lifted her gaze toward him, trying to focus. "I think I might faint," she whispered. He knew this could become dangerous. Staying inside the car without support might increase the risk if she lost consciousness. I want to help you sit more safely, he said carefully. But I will not come closer unless you tell me it's okay. She stared at him, fear returning to her eyes. For several long seconds she said nothing. The storm had forced them together, but this moment required a deeper decision. Her breathing became uneven again. Pain and fear mixed together, making it harder for her to think clearly. Finally she spoke, her voice barely audible. Okay, but slowly. He nodded once, showing that he understood the responsibility of her trust. I will tell you every movement before I do it, he said gently. He stepped closer, moving slowly enough that she could stop him at any moment. The distance between them felt significant, a line crossed only because she allowed it. When he reached the door, he paused. I'm opening the door now. Cold air rushed inside as he opened it carefully. He kept his movements controlled, never sudden. I'm going to help you lean back slightly, he said softly. Is that okay? Another nod. His touch was light and steady, focused only on support. He avoided unnecessary contact, honoring the trust she had given. Emily's body tensed at first, but she forced herself to stay calm, focusing on his slow breathing. You're safe, he said quietly. The words felt different now. They were no longer distant reassurance. They were something she could feel. Once she was positioned more securely, he stepped back again, giving her space immediately. She looked at him with surprise, as if expecting him to remain close. When he moved away, her shoulders relaxed. Thank you, she said, her voice stronger despite the pain. He nodded, returning to his earlier place. The moment marked a turning point between them. She had allowed him to help physically, and he had shown that her trust would not be misused. Outside, the storm continued fading slowly. The night remained long, but hope began growing quietly between them. For the first time since the accident, Emily felt something she had not expected. Not just safety from the cold, but safety from fear itself. The night slowly moved toward early morning, though darkness still covered the land. The storm had weakened, but the cold felt deeper now, settling into the ground and the air like a heavy weight. Snow lay thick around the damaged car, turning the world into a quiet white landscape that stretched in every direction. Daniel watched the horizon carefully, hoping for signs of rescue lights, but the hills remained empty. He knew help would come, yet the weather could delay them longer than expected. That meant he had to prepare for the possibility of moving Emily to a safer place if her condition worsened. Inside the car, Emily leaned back against the seat, breathing slowly as he had taught her. The pain in her side came in waves, sometimes sharp, sometimes dull. She felt exhausted, but she stayed awake, focusing on Daniel's calm presence outside. "You're still with me?" he asked gently after a long silence. "Yes," she answered softly. Her voice sounded stronger than before, though fatigue remained clear. He smiled slightly, relieved. "Good." The wind shifted direction, sending a sudden rush of snow across the ground. Daniel noticed that the car's light was growing weaker. If it failed completely, the darkness would make everything harder. "I need to check something," he said. "I will stay close." She nodded, watching him carefully as he walked around the vehicle. After a few minutes he returned. "The battery may not last much longer," he explained calmly. "We might lose the light soon." Emily looked around nervously, imagining the darkness closing in. "What happens then?" she asked. "We stay calm," he replied. "I have flashlights and supplies. But I need to think about another option, too." She waited, sensing that he was choosing his words carefully. "There is a small ranger cabin about half a mile from here," he said slowly. "If we reach it, you will be warmer and safer while waiting for rescue." Moving meant more contact, more uncertainty. "I don't know if I can walk," she whispered. "You don't have to," he said gently. "I can support you. But only if you agree." The choice remained hers. He never tried to pressure her. They sat in silence for a moment while she considered the idea. Fear returned briefly, but it felt different now. Less overwhelming, more like a shadow she could face. "Is it dangerous to stay here?" she asked. "The cold is the biggest risk," he answered honestly. And if the light goes out, it becomes harder to keep you alert. She closed her eyes, thinking. The decision felt heavy, but she remembered how carefully he had respected her boundaries. Slowly, she nodded.
Okay, she said quietly.
But slowly. Always slowly, he replied with a small, reassuring smile. He began preparing immediately, gathering extra blankets, a flashlight, and supplies from his truck. Every action was calm and organized. He explained each step so she knew exactly what was happening. I will help you stand first, he said. Tell me if you want me to stop at any moment. She took a deep breath and nodded. When he opened the car door, cold air rushed inside again. He offered his arm carefully, allowing her to choose how much support she needed. She hesitated before placing her hand lightly against him. The contact felt unfamiliar but not frightening. His grip remained steady but gentle. Standing caused a wave of dizziness, and she leaned more heavily against him. Take your time, he said softly. No rush. They waited until her balance returned before taking the first step. Snow crunched beneath their feet, the sound loud in the quiet world around them. The path toward the cabin moved slightly uphill. Daniel adjusted his pace to match hers, never pulling or pushing. When she stumbled, he steadied her without tightening his grip too much. Each step felt like a small victory. The sky above began showing faint signs of early dawn, though the light remained weak. The cold air stung their faces, and Emily's breathing grew heavier as they moved forward. Do you need to rest? He asked gently. Yes, she admitted. They stopped beside a large rock, and he helped her sit carefully. She wrapped the blanket tight around herself, shivering slightly. You're doing very well, he said. She looked at him, surprised again by his constant encouragement. I don't feel strong, she said quietly. Strength isn't always loud, he replied. Sometimes it's just continuing one step at a time. His words stayed with her as they resumed walking. The journey felt longer than expected. Snow slowed their progress, and the uneven ground required careful movement. At one point, Emily slipped slightly, fear flashing across her face, but Daniel steadied her quickly. I've got you, he said calmly. She nodded, breathing slowly as she regained confidence. As they moved, he told small stories again, simple things meant to keep her focused and awake. She listened, occasionally asking questions. The conversation helped distract her from pain and fear. Finally, through the thin morning light, a small wooden structure appeared between the trees. The cabin, he said softly. Relief crossed her face. Reaching it required one last effort. When they arrived, he opened the door and guided her inside. The space was simple but protected from the wind. He quickly arranged blankets and checked the small emergency heater. Warmth slowly began filling the room. Emily sat down carefully, exhaustion washing over her. The silence inside felt peaceful compared to the storm outside. Daniel stepped back, giving her space again once she was settled. You made it, he said gently. She looked at him, her eyes soft with gratitude. We made it, she replied quietly. The words carried meaning beyond the journey itself. They showed trust, partnership, and shared survival. Outside, the sky grew brighter as morning approached. Rescue would likely find them soon, but the hardest part of the night had already passed. Not just the cold or the storm, but the distance that once existed between two strangers. Morning light slowly entered through the small window of the cabin, turning the cold blue shadows into soft gray shapes. Outside, the storm had finally passed, leaving the land quiet and still. Snow covered everything, shining gently under the rising sun. Inside, the air felt warmer, and for the first time since the accident, there was a sense of safety that did not feel fragile. Emily sat wrapped in blankets near the small heater. Her body felt heavy with exhaustion, but the sharp edge of fear that had followed her for so long had softened. She watched Daniel moving calmly around the room, checking supplies and making sure everything remained steady. Even now, after helping her through the long night, he did not crowd her space. He gave her room to breathe, room to think. How are you feeling? He asked gently. Tired, she admitted with a small smile. But better, he nodded, satisfied with her answer. That's good. Silence settled between them, but it felt peaceful instead of uncomfortable. Outside, a distant sound broke the quiet, faint at first, then clearer. The low hum of an engine moved across the hills. Daniel walked to the window and looked out carefully. After a moment, he turned back toward her. "I think they found us," he said softly. Relief washed over her face, mixed with something else she could not fully name. The long night had created a connection she had not expected. Part of her felt grateful for rescue, but another part felt unsure about what would come next. Soon, the sound grew louder. A rescue vehicle approached slowly, moving carefully over the snow-covered path. Bright lights reflected off the white ground as it stopped near the cabin. Daniel stepped outside briefly, speaking with the rescuers and guiding them toward the door. 2 medical workers entered, their movements calm and professional. They greeted Emily gently, explaining each step before checking her injuries. Daniel watched quietly from a distance, allowing them to take over while staying close enough that she could see him. She noticed how he avoided standing too close, as if he understood she might feel overwhelmed by sudden changes. Even now, he respected the space she needed. After examining her, the medical workers nodded reassuringly. "You're going to be okay," one of them said kindly. "We'll take you somewhere warm and safe for further care." Emily felt a wave of relief, mixed with nervousness. Hospitals and unfamiliar places usually made her anxious. Without thinking, she glanced toward Daniel. He gave her a small nod, as if silently telling her she could handle what came next. They helped her stand carefully, supporting her as they moved toward the door. Before leaving, she paused and looked back at him. "Are you coming?" she asked softly. He shook his head gently. "They will take good care of you now." The words felt final, and she realized he had never helped her for recognition or reward. He had simply done what needed to be done. Outside, the cold air felt less harsh under the sunlight. As they guided her toward the rescue vehicle, she turned once more, watching him standing near the cabin. The snow reflected light around him, and for a moment he looked like part of the landscape itself, steady, quiet, and deeply rooted. She wanted to say something more, but words felt too small for what she felt. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice clear despite emotion. He nodded once. "You did the hard part," he replied. "You trusted." The simple sentence stayed with her as they helped her into the vehicle. As it drove away, she watched through the window until the cabin and the figure of Daniel disappeared behind the hills. Days later, she sat in a warm hospital room, reflecting on everything that had happened. Doctors assured her that her injuries would heal with time. Friends and family visited, relieved that she had survived the storm. Yet her thoughts often returned to the quiet hours in the snow, to the calm voice that never demanded anything from her. Before the accident, she had carried heavy fear that made her pull away from others. Trust had felt impossible. But during that long night, she had learned something new, that safety could exist without pressure, that kindness could be patient, and that strength sometimes meant allowing someone to stand beside you. Weeks passed. Physical healing came slowly but steadily. Emotional healing felt more complex, but she noticed small changes in herself. She spoke more openly with people she trusted. She allowed herself moments of calm instead of constant alertness. One afternoon she returned to painting, something she had not done in a long time. Her hands moved carefully across the canvas, creating a snowy landscape under a soft sky. At the center, she painted a small cabin surrounded by quiet hills. She realized that the night had given her more than survival. It had given her a different way of seeing strength, not as control or distance, but as connection built through respect. Months later, she returned to the area where the accident had happened. The snow had melted, revealing green grass and wide-open views. She walked slowly along the path, feeling both nervous and calm at the same time. Near the hill, she saw Daniel again. He stood beside his truck, speaking with another community member. When he noticed her, he offered a simple nod, as if greeting an old friend rather than someone he had rescued. She approached slowly, unsure what to say. Words felt unnecessary at first. They stood in silence, looking out at the land. I wanted to come back, she said finally. I'm glad you did, he replied. They talked quietly for a while, sharing simple updates about their lives. Nothing dramatic, nothing forced. The conversation felt natural. Before leaving, she looked at him with gratitude. You helped me more than you know, she said. He shook his head slightly. You helped yourself. I just walked beside you. She realized that the strength she had discovered during the storm had always been inside her. He had simply created the space where it could grow. As she walked away, she felt lighter than she had in years. The experience had changed her understanding of trust, of patience, and of what it meant to truly help someone. The story did not end with dramatic words or grand gestures. It ended quietly, like the snow falling softly during that long night, with two people whose lives crossed for a moment and left lasting change behind.